Hogwarts, Muggle Fraudster Outshines Wizards with Deception. Episode 46. In anime, there is also such a thing as potions, and Lewis feels that this thing may be helpful in the production of potions. The beginning was a colorless and transparent glass seed, and as Lewis absorbed the idea, it quickly merged into Lewis's palm, and a faint sense of chi began to circulate in the body. At the same time, Lewis felt that the power of the 12 spells in his body seemed to have changed slightly. This is what Lewis did not expect. However, for the time being, I don't feel much change between the two. As the texture of chi magic pours into the body, it comes with some simple rituals and magic uses related to chi magic. It's just that this magic is very different from the magic of the Harry Potter world and cannot be confused. So the research of chi magic will be put aside for the time being and take a look at the remaining rewards. Special class rewards. Lewis looked at what he had taken out of the storage space with a twinkle in his eyes. The special props drawn from the last reward draw were a set of swords with good effects but strange mutual restraint. This time it seems that the two items are different, at least not a set. The first is another prop from League of Legends. Medge's soul-stealing scroll, an evil scroll that absorbs the soul that kills life from the holder and stores it to strengthen the holder, while the scroll transfers the most powerful ability to absorb souls to the holder. The introduction is very concise, but the effect gives Lewis a bit of a headache. He didn't intend to be a murderous devil, although he made trouble and tortured people. But he knew that he was a good person, and killing people and strengthening himself was too evil. This thing has to be hidden. If it is thrown outside, something big will inevitably happen. Lewis frowned and looked at the scroll, and suddenly his mind moved. Since it is a soul-stealing scroll, it should be useful to all souls, right? Lewis remembered one of his plans, and felt that this one was a special match for this soul-stealing scroll. So Lewis put the scroll away first, planning to take it out and experiment with it when the time comes. Then he looked at the last and most special prop. Sherlock Holmes pipe. Holmes Lewis certainly knows that a well-thought, well-known detective fictionalized by British writer Conan Doyle. And what is the effect of this special prop that claims to be his pipe? Lewis took out his pipe and looked at it carefully. This is a heatherwood pipe, made of the best half-year-old heather nodules. The wood grain is clear and bright. It seems that the wood in the position of the pipe is often held in the hand to play with the pipe red and shiny, like slurry. Sherlock Holmes pipe, light the endless tobacco, take a puff before thinking, and sit still for 5 minutes to quickly clear your mind and arrive at the answer. Note, you must have enough clues to think about the question, or start from yourself, otherwise the answer will not be clear enough. Good stuff. After seeing the effect, Lewis was intrigued. This thing is an inspiration amplifier, which can sort out your thoughts in a short time to find inspiration, and belongs to magical props that can be encountered. Lewis planned to try it when he went back to his dorm. Look at the time, there is only half an hour left before the class, and students are coming over one after another. Maybe Professor Snape will also come in advance, and at this time it is a little too arrogant to swallow clouds in the classroom. Lewis put away his pipe before the first student came in. The class was still Slytherin and Gryffindor, and whoever entered the classroom would first look at Lewis's face. If it was a Gryffindor boy, he would look at an idol, while the Slytherin boy would have a complicated expression, especially Draco Malfoy, who always felt that what happened to him had nothing to do with this mudblood. So he didn't dare to use the word mudblood on the other party's body now. And if it was a girl from 2 college girls, they would peek at Lewis's face while discussing with the people around them. Including the Slytherin girls, their gazes are more aggressive. It seems that he is quite famous in school. Lewis calmly accepted the hidden or direct gaze around him, without the slightest stage fright. If you don't see the class soon, you will have to do a big magic trick. With the morning's lesson, Harry and Ron were not late this time, and when everyone was seated, Snape burst into the classroom in a storm. The professor still had slightly oily hair and a shawl, and his black body was as black as a big bat. As soon as he entered the door, he said in his trademark tone of frustration, "Put away your wands, you won't need to wave your little sticks around in potions class, you'll learn here how to quietly put others down, fascinate others, even. Eternal life." As a Slytherin, Snape's teaching method is simple and crude, directly using profit to attract interest, but the so-called eternal life is pure nonsense. The only effective undead medicine in the wizarding world is made from Nicolam's Philosopher's Stone. Without the Philosopher's Stone, the undead medicine is just a joke. Talk about immortality? Lewis listened and thought, and then he noticed the straightforward Harry Potter, and was trying to take notes, writing down Snape's words on the notebook. Then he was targeted by Snape. Snape's eyes must have looked, and his tone became low. Maybe some of you think your reputation can ignore what I say. As soon as the words fell, everyone's eyes looked at Lewis sitting at the back, including Harry Potter, who was taking notes. Louise. No, what do you see me doing? Look at Harry, Snape is clearly talking about him. Lewis blinked somewhat innocently and looked up to meet Snape's stunned face, and then Lewis lowered his head and didn't look into his eyes. Professor Snape is also a Dementor, and looking at him also has the possibility of revealing secrets. And this one's moral level is far inferior to Dumbledore, and Lewis is more wary of him. It is estimated that Snape did not expect that the uniform movements of the class would actually point to Lewis, which would not make him whole, and the questions that he originally planned to make Harry Potter difficult were a little difficult to ask. Okay, listen carefully, let's start the class, turn your book to the first page, let's see, how to deal with aconitum. Although Snape is morally flawed, his teaching level is good, and the content is not too boring. But Gryffindor was really aggrieved when he was in potions class. Episode 47. Although Snape's opening difficulties ended before they even began, he always found an opportunity to ask Harry some knowledge about the textbook during the lessons. Even if Harry did read as much as Lewis admonished, he wouldn't be able to answer these things. As a result, there was no emotional deduction of points, and after one class, Gryffindor deducted at least 30 points, and Harry and Ron's faces turned green. Fortunately, the first year of Gryffindor had long been told about Snape's habits, otherwise they would inevitably complain to Harry. It seems that Professor Snape has a big opinion about the savior with a rival face and the eyes of his first love. After class, Lewis packed up his things and headed to the library. There was still a moment before the time for dinner, but he had made an appointment with Hermione. Life on campus at Hogwarts is still very loose, because there is only one teacher in each class, the student classes are not too tight, and there is plenty of time for students to explore the campus. On his way to the library, Lewis saw several senior wizards sneaking towards the 4th floor, the lead two being red-haired twins. It seems that they are curious about the corridor where Dumbledore said, "Don't go if you don't want to incur pain." Lewis calculated the time and felt that it should be too late, so he followed to see the excitement. There were Gryffindors and Ravenclaws and Hufflepuffs in the group, but no Slytherins. Because the Slytherin boys haven't fully recovered yet, coupled with the cautious nature of Slytherin, they don't want to participate in this activity that they know is dangerous. Therefore, the only Lewis wearing a Slytherin robe is particularly eye-catching. But it soon became clear who the only Slytherin was, and the first twin squeezed over and greeted Lewis. "Good afternoon, Wilson." The twins greet each other at the same time. "I'm George Weasley." "I'm Fred Weasley." "Hello guys." Lewis nodded. "Looks like you all know me. You overturned the legend of an academy boy overnight, who wouldn't know you." The twins are exceptionally self-cooked, and if they weren't worried about Lewis's reaction, they would have put their arms on Lewis's shoulders. "Looks like you're not difficult to get along with, how about it? Would you like to join us in exploring the corridors on the 4th floor?" George Weasley extended an invitation. "Are you sure?" Headmaster Dumbledore had told him it was dangerous. Lewis said. "Yes, but this is Hogwarts, the safest place in the UK." Fred Weasley winked at Lewis. "Sounds more like the headmaster is encouraging us, doesn't it? Sounds interesting." Lewis nodded approvingly, "But I just passed by to take a look." "Okay, passing by." George Weasley shrugged. "Let's go." With the addition of Lewis, this team seems to be a little more confident. After all, from the perspective of the record, Lewis, a first-year freshman, has the strongest combat effectiveness. They can certainly rest assured, because Lewis will only be stronger than they think. The corridor on the 4th floor is a large area, and a group of students swept the street and looked at all corners of the corridor, but found nothing. Until they found the door at the end of the corridor, they were sure that they had found their target. "It should be here, a spell has been cast on the door lock." A Ravenclaw student tried to unlock the door, but the seemingly simple latch didn't move. "Leave it to me," the Weasley twins said at the same time, then looked at each other. "I'll come." "No, it should be me." The two twins were facing each other, almost fighting, and the students around them seemed to be accustomed to it, watching the two bicker. Suddenly the two reconciled again. They didn't know how to resolve their conflict, and Fred Weasley came forward to cast the spell. Fred Weasley walked to the door, pulled out his wand and pointed it at the latch and chanted, "Arajo hole open." The latch opened with a sound, and the worn but sturdy wooden door slowly opened. The students let out a cheer and hurriedly opened the door to rush in. Lewis stood last, watching with a strange expression as several wizards rushed in happily. He knew what was inside, a huge 3-headed dog named Lue, guarding the live wrench leading downstairs. So where exactly is the Philosopher's Stone stored? Lewis was distracted again. In contrast, the Weasley's twins were more wary, perhaps because of their frequent experience of death, but they couldn't stop the emotional wizards, almost all of whom crowded in front of narrow doors, wanting to be the first to witness where Dumbledore forbade them to enter. Then, the first to go let out a terrified scream. This scream startled the people outside the door, and before they could ask, a fishy wind poured out of the gap in the door with a roar. "It's a 3-headed dog. Come on, don't block the door, get out of here. You stepped on my foot." The wizards were in a mess, but the more chaotic it was, the more difficult it was to get out, and there were already cries of pain and the whining of 3-headed dogs in the room, but there were still people with weak legs blocking the door so that the people inside could not take it out. This is a real cow batch. Lewis had some pity for these pig teammates. In order to prevent the group from stupidizing themselves, Lewis waved his hand, and the invisible buoyancy force of the chicken charm threw the wizard blocking the door behind him like garbage, allowing the wizard who had not yet been bitten to escape. George and Fred picked up their wands and rushed in, not sure if they were stupid or confident in themselves. Louis Chiron walked in and saw the twins saving 2 unlucky eggs who were bitten by a 3-headed dog. George and Fred are still a little capable, after all, they are geniuses who can make joke magic props by themselves. If they can't even have the corresponding spells, how can they talk about making props? Fainting. George and Fred cast a spell at the same time, and the coma curse smashed into the 2 dog heads that bit the unlucky egg's calf. The ball of light smashed on the dog's head just smashed them crookedly, and did not play a role in making the other party unconscious at all. Because of the high magic curse resistance of the 3-headed dog, such as Lewis, he has 50% black magic resistance, and all black magic effects will be weakened on him. However, magical animals like 3-headed dogs generally have a fixed full magic resistance value, and magical powers beyond this threshold will have an effect on them, but George and Fred obviously do not have this ability. However, these 2 spells also attracted the attention of the 3-headed dog, which spat out 2 unlucky eggs that were about to faint and turned its head towards the twins. "Wilson, take them with you," George Weasley shouted, and Fred deftly dodged to the sides, dodging the 3-headed dog's pounce, and then 2 more stun curses were thrown into the 3-headed dog's face. The twins are only in the 3rd grade this year, and they have learned to attack spells very little, except for the playful incisor competition stick and the tarantella dance. Only the coma spell has a little attack power. Seeing this, Lewis directly used the power of the chicken charm to send the 2 unlucky eggs out, and then pulled out a long balloon from his sleeve and blew it up. Although he can directly use the power of the chicken charm to pull the twins to leave directly, and even beat the 3-headed dog by the way, this is not challenging, let alone ornamental, and will directly expose his super strength. He can say that he saved people with a floating charm, but he can't say that he beat the 3-headed dog with a floating charm by the way, right? What's more, magicians can use force without force, or it is more interesting to get out of trouble in an elegant and gorgeous way. This is in line with the principle of a magician. Episode 48. After the balloon blew up, it left a small space, Lewis's fingers rolled nimbly, and soon a balloon puppy appeared in his hand. "You go out quickly, we'll get out in a moment." Fred saw that Lewis had not left and quickly shouted. "Either you come and help, don't stand in the doorway." Lewis ignored it and instead used the power of the monkey charm on the balloon puppy. The balloon puppy suddenly changed. The traces of folding on its body are gone, and it becomes a vivid, as if it was born to be a balloon with the appearance of a dog. Well, the monkey charm can't make dead things alive. Lewis muttered and used the power of the rat charm. The light flashed, and a dog with a big slap appeared in Lewis's hand. A sharp-toothed, exceptionally grumpy chihuahua woke up from ignorance and screamed at Lewis. "Back off!" Lewis shouted and threw the barking dog in his hand at the 3-headed dog. The dog let out a sharp bark and flew towards the fierce 3-headed dog. George had a tacit understanding with Fred and Lewis, and after hearing Lewis's voice, he was stunned for a moment and saw a poor dog flying towards the 3-headed dog. Where are the dogs? This was a subconscious thought that flashed through George and Fred's minds, and then they saw the 3-headed dog being attracted by the dog, and the 3 mouths spit over. The attention of the 3-headed dog is drawn away. The arrogant barking of a chihuahua can't even stand a person, let alone a grumpy 3-headed dog. George and Fred also knew that the opportunity was rare, so they turned around and ran. But how long can a little chihuahua drag on? Fred ran while looking back to watch for the 3-headed dog that could rush at any moment, and then he happened to see the scene where the head in the middle of the 3-headed dog was grumpy and tearing open the chihuahua. There was no scene of blood splashing, only the sound of a balloon exploding, and a flame burst out of the dog's body and touched the eyes of the 3-headed dog. Although the flames did not cause any damage to the 3-headed dog, it also startled it, and the 6 eyes were closed, retreated indiscriminately, and accidentally stumbled on the left leg and fell to the ground with the right leg. Now the time is completely enough. Lewis rushed out first, followed by George and Fred, and when everyone left, Lewis kicked the door and latched it, ending the farce once and for all. George and Fred lay on the ground panting, and there were 2 unlucky eggs next to them unconscious, with indistinct screams coming out of their mouths. As for the other people, they have long run away, and it is estimated that they are looking for a professor to save people. You guys are miserable. Lewis stood in the doorway listening to the growl on the other side of the door and said to George and Fred, who were slumped on the ground. Shouldn't we be miserable? Fred questioned. Of course not, I was just passing by here and heard screams so I rushed in to meet the righteous Slytherin. Lewis lifted his somewhat crooked top hat. Good luck to you. He could already hear Professor McGonagall's growl across the hallway. In the end, Gryffindor, Ravenclaw, Hufflepuff, and the three houses each deducted 50 points and were fined for helping Filch clean the castle. And Slytherin. The boys in Slytherin are all sick, but the only Slytherin is a passing-by person who sees the righteousness. Professor McGonagall stared at Lewis with suspicion, but by asking about the portrait in the hallway, she got the answer: he was passing by. So the Slytherin added 50 points. George and Fred were shocked, and they agreed that Lewis was too cunning. No wonder they would say that he was just passing by under the gaze of those portraits when they met. How the hell did you do it? Fred and George entangled behind Lewis. Is that a transfiguration curse? But why is it on fire? That's a magician's secret, I can't tell you. Lewis said with empty eyes. He was watching the system prompts, so he didn't care about the entanglement of these two people. You fooled a magical beast, three-headed dog, with magic combined with fire magic. You get fraud points, 120 points. Current points, 14,440. This is the first fantastic beast you successfully fooled. You activated the achievement, Fantastic Beasts Tamer. Fantastic Beasts Tamer, improve affinity and control of fantastic beasts. Each 3 magical beasts slightly increases the effect of this achievement. Another achievement, and this one seems more useful than the fraudster who mocked the Dark Lord, and more importantly it can grow. Going back to see if it works for Fafnir, owls are also considered fantastic beasts. In a flash, Lewis looked up to find himself in the library, and the Weasley's twins were still following him. How long are you going to stay with me? Lewis looked back at the two helplessly. If only a pair of twin sisters would be interested in saying a few more words, male. Forget it, hurry up and send it away. We were curious about that magic. The twins said in unison. Lewis shook his head. I said, this is a magician's secret that cannot be given to others, casually. We'll exchange things with you. George took out a candy box from his pocket. This is our new invention, fast-acting truancy candy, and if you eat it, you will have some symptoms that are not so serious, but enough to make you skip class. There are 10 in it, and the effect disappears after 10 minutes. He said as he handed the candy box to Lewis. It sounds funny, and seems to be a potions-related product. Lewis poured out one and looked at it. There was nothing special in appearance, just ordinary candy, which smelled a faint smell of medicine. It's interesting, but my magic is family heirloom and very precious. Lewis said so while holding the candy box, but did not return it to his twin brothers. Still not okay? George shrugged regretfully, then. Gotta add money. I mean add something else. Lewis raised an eyebrow and held out his other hand. The twins were silent for a while, looked at each other and laughed. You're really funny. Fred smiled and took out a round ball from his pocket. Give, this is a big dung ball, not made by ourselves, it is a product of Jockowee's joke shop. As soon as this thing was taken out, Lewis smelled an indescribable stench. Forget about this thing, you better keep it yourself. Lewis pinched his nose and said in disgust. So what to do? We have everything else in the experimental stage, there is no finished product. Fred spread his hands helplessly. You can make magic items yourself? Lewis asked after listening. And those candies, it sounds like potions, but the properties of potions can't be changed, so that's alchemy? Episode 49, Alchemy. No, we'll mostly figure it out on our own. Hogwarts has alchemy classes, but it's only open to 6th and 7th year students, and classes won't start if there aren't enough choices, George said helplessly. Most of the 6th and 7th graders are busy with the ultimate wizarding exam, and no one has the heart to open an extra class to make it more difficult for themselves. So you are self-taught. It seems that you have not visited the Forbidden Book area. Lewis said. You can't say this nonsense. The twins retorted in unison. Well, whatever you want. Lewis covered his nose. Put this thing away, and this, he said and returned the quick-acting truancy candy to the twins. So the deal failed. George took the sugar box. Not really. Lewis took out a bag of powder from under his robe, under which his seemingly normal robe was actually hand-modified and sewn into many pockets, and various props. I see you're interested in magic, I can teach you, but you have to teach me to make those props. Lewis said. This is for you, it's what you want. Sounds fair. Fred just thought casually and nodded in agreement. Then it's settled. He said as he took the bag of powder. How is this used? This is a spontaneous combustion prop made of white phosphorus, quicklime, and flammable metal powder, which is a little dangerous, don't use it indiscriminately. Lewis explains, I put a little bit in when I blew the ball, so it was. Fred was bold and took out a handful of powder without saying a word. It's amazing, they don't have a little magic, but they burn on their own. Although the ignition point of this thing is higher than the body temperature, it is still dangerous to take it like this. Lewis frowned, a little worried that this thing would not be too dangerous in the hands of the twins. Okay, we got it. Fred put the powder back in the bag, clapped his hands nonchalantly, and the dust suddenly burst out with a bright fire that almost burned Fred's eyebrows. Fred jumped up like a frightened horse monkey, and George pointed at him and laughed. Look, I said it was dangerous. Lewis patted them on the shoulder. Now I advise you to run, because I see Filch running towards this side and look excited. Why? We didn't break the school rules. George and Fred said nonchalantly. Are you going to expect a squib living in a Hogwarts castle to tell the difference between magic and magic? He saw the fire. Lewis nodded, waved his hand, and said, or you can try to convince him. I still have an appointment. Good luck. George and Fred glanced at each other, both heard the rapid approaching footsteps behind them, and shouted strangely, run. Before the words fell, the two rushed out. Stop. I saw you. You actually dare to use magic in the corridor. You can't run away. Filch shouted as he caught up. Lewis stood in the doorway of the library, shrugged his shoulders as the three chasing figures turned a corner and disappeared. Lewis? How long have you been here? Coincidentally, at this time, Hermione happened to come over with a Ravenclaw student and asked after seeing Lewis. Hermione, good afternoon. Lewis took off his top hat. This is? He glanced at the Ravenclaw beside Hermione, and from the other party's physical features, he could tell that this person did not seem to be European. She's Padma Petal, my roommate, Hermione introduced. She's from India. Hello, my name is Lewis Wilson, Slytherin. Lewis introduced himself. I know you. Padma Petal is a delicate-looking girl whose ethnicity can be seen from her skin color and appearance. You're brave, smart, and strong enough. She smiled and said, we've all heard about your deeds in Slytherin. Lewis coughed dryly. Those are all rumors. I didn't do anything. They were having their own nightmares. So you really have a nightmare bloodline? Like the legendary Merlin? Padma asked, leaning over to Lewis's side and staring at his face. Lewis's eyelids lifted, and his heart said that you were teasing me? Instead of stepping back, he took a step forward. The distance was so delicate that Padma's body was almost attached to Lewis. After all, the other party was just a little girl, and Lewis had a thick skin, so he could only take a step back with a red face. What are you doing? Hermione stepped across Padma and looked at Lewis suspiciously. Just kidding. Lewis put on a top hat. Let's go inside. It's not funny at all. Hermione muttered, forcing down the uncomfortable feeling in her heart. The three of them approached the library together, and a quiet lady with eyes looked up at the three of them. This is Ms. Pants, the librarian. No noise in the library, no eating and drinking. If you want to borrow books, you need to bring books to the front desk to register. Remember not to destroy and defile books. Ms. Pants quickly and succinctly conveyed the library's considerations. Also, you are not allowed to enter the forbidden area unless you have a certificate from the professor or the headmaster. Yes, Mrs. Pants. Hermione and Padma replied that they were going inside. Instead, Lewis stopped, took Dumbledore's specially approved slip from his pocket, and handed it to Mrs. Pants under the surprised eyes of Hermione and Padma. Who are you this lady? Lewis asked politely. Mrs. Pants took the note, glanced at it, and then took off her glasses to look at Lewis with a surprised face. That's right, this is Headmaster Dumbledore's note. Mrs. Pants said, however, books in the forbidden section cannot be brought out, they can only be viewed inside, and all books you read must be registered. Yes, ma'am. Lewis lifted his top hat and turned to look at Hermione and Padma. Why are you standing here? Don't go in? Lewis, where did you get the approval slip? Hermione asked in surprise, because she was too surprised to control the volume, and quickly lowered her voice after being glared at by Mrs. Pants. It's still Headmaster Dumbledore's. Of course, Headmaster Dumbledore's approval slip came from Dumbledore, Lewis said reasonably. But the books in the forbidden area are dangerous and generally closed to students. Padma looked at Lewis's eyes brightly. How did you convince him? It's just compensation. Lewis said, sorry for missing a while, I'm going to go to the forbidden book area. Don't you do your homework first? Assignments for the Transfiguration class. Hermione asked. Oh, Professor McGonagall dispensed with my homework because of my class performance. Lewis showed a scholarly smile. Come on, you guys. Episode 50. Lewis's performance is particularly bad. If it is not for the good tempers of the two girls, the high and low will give Lewis a shot. Okay. Hermione pouted. Then let's go over there. You'll come to us later. Good. Lewis nodded and said goodbye to Hermione and Padma, heading straight to the location of the forbidden area in the depths of the library. The forbidden area is clearly layered with the rest of the library, and the forbidden area is more gloomy from the point of view of the decoration, guarded by portraits here. And compared to the books on the periphery, every book here is chained to the shelves by thick iron chains, and each chain is blessed with powerful magic, and it is almost impossible to take them away with brute force. Even the power of Lewis's bull charm is not good, because magic connects books, chains, and bookshelves, and Lewis can drag them away with the bookshelf, but Hugh wants to take out a separate copy. Perhaps the swords of the series of Murakaichi Ken will work. But Lewis did not intend to steal books violently. There was no need for that. He was not here for those powerful dark magic that would be jealous of Dumbledore, and he could not learn. He mainly came to find alchemy, or to make books related to magical props. He wanted to make more direct magic props with magic as the core, which were more difficult to see. It wasn't because of a whim after being seen through by the Phoenix. Lewis had an immature idea long before entering Hogwarts, and subsequent experiences only confirmed this idea. So he didn't say anything back to the Weasley twins, hoping to gain some experience from them so that he could do it himself when he had enough knowledge. Admittedly, he can get the items he wants from the Weasley twins by purchasing custom means by simply telling them what he needs, but that would be tantamount to kicking off too early before the show, and both the performance experience and the acquisition of fraud points are detrimental. And magicians don't necessarily make their own performance props, but they must be more assured of the performance props they make. Old Wilson, that is, Lewis's grandfather, is like this. Because of the danger of escaping magic, he has always been hands-on with props. This was not the case with Mr. Wilson, whose props for his large-scale magic tricks were so complex and all-encompassing that he had to rely on some famous theater company so that he could access the large instruments at any time. Lewis's eyes searched the bookshelf, and he was a little worried at first, because he had heard the Weasley twins say that there were few alchemy classes at Hogwarts, so he was worried that the forbidden book area did not contain relevant professional books. But soon he found himself overwhelmed. After all, the Weasley twins probably didn't dangle here during night trips, and a lot of their knowledge was learned in the forbidden book area. From chaos out of control to precise control, Hermes and Hermancora's, Potions and Alchemy, the Paracel's manuscript. Lewis found 3 unique alchemy books on the shelf, the first of which, From Chaos Out of Control to Precise Control, explained the production of various explosives from the beginning of alchemy, to the precision alchemical creations included by some authors in a later period. It's a pity that there are missing in the back of this book, most of which are the production methods of some modern magic props, such as double-sided mirrors, time turners, and so on. On the contrary, the records of dangerous and unstable explosives are particularly detailed. No wonder this book is in the banned area. Lewis held the large tome with chains on the spine, shook his head after a quick flip through the book, and put it back. The book was at least 20 pounds, and he wouldn't have been able to hold it up if it weren't for the cow charm supporting his 11-year-old physique. Although there are no alchemical creations worth noting, the above techniques and production methods are still very reasonable as experience, so let's write them down first. Lewis sorted out what he had learned, and the explosives were selectively forgotten by him, leaving only key lessons behind. As for explosives? That thing didn't work well as the dragon charm, so why would he waste materials to make something he could rub out at hand? The second is Hermes and Hermonculus. Hermes is a god messenger in ancient Greek mythology, and is also regarded as the ancestor of alchemy, and Hermonculus is the highest creation of alchemy, known as the perfect creature of the little man in a bottle. The title sounds good, but the content makes Lewis frown. This is a book about how to make an alchemical life, but the method introduced above is too cruel, basically equivalent to using the life sacrifice of a village or even a town to create a mentally retarded method that cannot be spoken. Stupid and hysterical. Lewis stuffed the book back in disgust. There was nothing worth learning in the book. However, there is a ritual about the resurrection above, and the process is very similar to the scene of Voldemort's resurrection. Probably I saw it in the forbidden book area when Voldemort was in school. Compared with the first and second books, the third book is much more practical and normal. This is a specialized book on the relationship between potions and alchemy, and it is placed in the forbidden book area simply because it is too esoteric for young wizards to watch. Paracelsus was a healer and alchemist, and his expertise in potions and alchemy naturally allowed him to combine the two to form alchemical potions and ordinary potions with the same effect. The Weasley twins' quick-acting truancy 8 achievements were inspired by this book. After reading this book, Lewis had a feeling that his head was swelling, and his brain was piled up with too much knowledge that needed to be digested. No hurry, there is still a long time, and the book will not run. Lewis looked up at the vast sea of books and left the forbidden area contented. He then found Hermione and Padma in the outer area. The homework of the two was almost written at this time, and judging from the books placed around the two, they borrowed a lot of materials. Girls, how is the homework done? Lewis walked over and naturally sat down beside Hermione and lowered his top hat. It's almost done. It's nice to do homework in the library, there are always books we need here. Hermione looked up at Lewis. How about the books in the forbidden area? To be honest, it's not very good, and it's not for nothing that some books are placed in the banned book area. Lewis shook his head. By the way, do you have any books on alchemy found outside? Episode 51, Alchemy? It turns out that you are interested in this, but unfortunately, Hogwarts has not held this class for several years. Padma looked up and said, I found a copy of Magical Alchemy over there. I saw simple alchemy prop making over there, Hermione said, pointing to the other side. Thank you for your helpful help and amazing memory. Lewis laughed. I'll go get the book and take a look at my hat for me. Go, here we are. Hermione said. Lewis goes to the place where the two girls guide him, and soon finds the two books, as well as a strange book called Funny and Alchemy. Holding the three books, Lewis returned to Hermione's side and placed them on the table. The girls had finished their homework by this time and each found a book to read. Worthy of being a Ravenclaw student, the learning atmosphere is strong. Lewis first took out the copy of Funny and Alchemy and read it, chatting casually while reading it. Have you ever met the Professor of Defense Against the Dark Arts? You mean Professor Quirrell? Padma looked up. Not yet, but listening to other grades, his class is very boring. Yes, everyone who has taken his classes say he only reads from books. Hermione also interspersed. That's weird, I heard that Defense Against the Dark Arts professor used to be a Ravenclaw student. Lewis rubbed the corners of his eyes and threw the book aside in his hand. Can't look anymore, the blood pressure goes up, and if you look at it again, he has an urge to tear the author off, and it's not too difficult. The author of this book is Jokowi, the owner of Jokowi's Joke Shop, which is located in Hogsmeade Village, and Lewis can kill the crappy author by the way by walking back and forth for a meal. I couldn't imagine that there was such an indiscriminate thing in the library of Hogwarts. He immediately changed to another book to ease his mood. Lewis's expression of reading aroused the curiosity of Padma, who was sitting across from him, and she reached for the book and looked at it a few times before throwing it aside with a strange face. This book is terrible, she said. What is the book? Hermione was curious to take a look. A scrap of paper full of nonsense, it's a waste of time to look at it. Lewis opened the book Simple Alchemy Prop Making. This book is much more reliable, not only the content is used normally, but also the production steps are particularly detailed, with illustrations. The author really wants to teach the reader. Hermione looked at the book with some disbelief, and when she read the page, she felt like she had eaten a fly. This book doesn't deserve to be in the Hogwarts library, Hermione grumbled. Lewis and Padma nodded appreciatively. In the evening, the golden glow of the setting sun shone through the window into the library, shining on the last page of Simple Alchemy Prop Making that Lewis was watching. Because he felt that the knowledge he received today might have reached the upper limit, Lewis did not use the wheel eye to copy, but read it normally, and as expected, he did not remember a few words. It's not early, go to dinner? Lewis closed the book and put it together with the magical alchemy that he had not yet read, intending to take it back and taste it slowly. I haven't finished reading some of this, you go first. Padma looked up and said, while Hermione, immersed in reading, didn't hear Lewis speak at all. Seeing this, Lewis patted Hermione on the shoulder and awakened Hermione, who was immersed in the ocean of knowledge. Is Hermione going to dinner? You go, I'll watch it a little longer. Hermione gave the same answer, and it seemed that she was a good fit for Ravenclaw House. Okay then, see you tomorrow. Lewis said goodbye to the two and went to Mrs. Pants to register the books she had read in the forbidden book area today, and then registered the two books he wanted to borrow. Cherish the borrowed books and remember to return them on time, Mrs. Pants instructed. Okay ma'am. Lewis wrote his name and left with two books. The evening menu was more sumptuous than at noon, and Lewis quickly filled his stomach and returned to the dormitory. The common room was bustling, with people reading books, others playing wizarding chess, and others huddling in the corner with desserts brought back from the auditorium. When Lewis entered, the lively common room suddenly fell silent, and everyone stared at Lewis. Good evening, everyone. Lewis greeted politely. No one responded to him, and the look in their eyes as they stared at Lewis was very strange, a mixture of disgust and fear. However, some eyes were very enthusiastic. They were Slytherin girls, not tormented by Lewis's illusions, but they had seen Lewis's methods from the boys' encounters. Seeing that there was no response, Lewis was not too surprised, and said that it was not his own circle not to drill hard, which is still very reasonable. He walked straight up the stairs to get back to his dormitory, and everywhere he passed, everyone was helplessly avoiding Lewis's path, for fear of getting in his way. For this treatment, Louise is satisfied. Back in the dormitory, as soon as he opened the door, he saw Draco Malfoy lying on his bed. He was so embarrassed that almost the entire school knew about his pants, and even the portraits could be heard discussing it from the hallway. Those big-mouthed Gryffindors. Draco Malfoy's teeth itched, but there was nothing to be done. His afternoon classes were torturous, and he always felt like someone was pointing at him, which made him desperate to find a crack to get into. That damn mudblood. No one remembered what had happened last night, and Draco Malfoy only remembered that he was going to teach the mudblood a lesson, and then he thought about opening the mudblood suitcase. And then what did he see? Malfoy was lost in thought, racking his brain to recall the memories of that time. Suddenly a voice sounded. Looks like you still have an opinion about me, Mr. Malfoy? A nightmarish voice suddenly sounded, and Malfoy shook and jumped out of bed to see Lewis standing in the doorway, taking off his top hat. You. When did you come in? Malfoy asked tremblingly, pointing at Lewis. From the time you said that damn mudblood. Lewis said lightly, suddenly sharpening his gaze at Malfoy. I hate when people point their fingers at me. Malfoy trembled, subconsciously withdrew his hands, and felt that this behavior was too instigated, and his elbows were shaking like cramps. Don't be proud, you mudblood, don't think I'm afraid of you. My dad is the director of this school, I can kick you out at any time. Malfoy felt his face damaged and screamed like a chihuahua torn apart by a three-headed dog. Is it? The mouth is still quite hard. Lewis's left eye flickered slightly, and the ready illusion rushed towards Malfoy. You're too noisy, give you memories of what fear is. Episode 52. Click. A thunder blast woke Malfoy. He sat up from the bed in a hurry, his mind muddy. What happened? How does he lie in bed? Malfoy recalled the last scene in his memory, only remembering the mudblood's strange expression, as if there was a looming red under his eyes. And then I fell asleep? Malfoy looked around, and he was sleeping with Bancrab and Goyle in bed. Everything seemed normal, but Malfoy had another uneasy feeling. He looked at the mudblood bed, which was high and bulging as if there was something huge under the covers. What is that? Malfoy felt a hint of fear, an unprovoked fear that made him panic, and a strange sense of familiarity welled up in his heart. Perhaps sleeping with his head covered was the right choice at this time, but Malfoy had a ghostly feeling, and by the time he woke up, he was already standing in front of the mudblood's bed. There was a terrible grinding sound under the bulging covers, and Malfoy felt his body tremble, but as if in a dream, he found that he couldn't control his body at all. He could only watch as his hand reached for the quilt and grasped the corner of the quilt. The grinding of teeth under the quilt suddenly stopped, as if the terrible monster below felt its approach, and suddenly Malfoy heard a voice behind him. Malfoy? What are you doing? It's Goyle's voice. Malfoy was on the verge of crying with excitement, and there was nothing happier than a partner. Goyle, pull me back, I can't control myself. Malfoy shouted back, his anxious voice tinged with crying. Are you like teaching that mudblood? However, Malfoy saw that Goyle did not obediently pull him away, but instead stretched out his hand and put it on his hand, and the cold touch made his body tremble. Let's pull away together and scare that mudblood. Goyle said excitedly, and a force that Malfoy couldn't resist jerked the quilt open. A funny clown appeared in front of Malfoy's eyes, the familiar color and appearance, the corners of his mouth outlined in bright red colors. Fear wrapped Malfoy's heart like a growing vine, and he saw the clown staring at him, the corners of his eyes painted in oil paint curved into a crescent moon like real ones. Goyle, we have to run. Malfoy's body stiffened, but when he saw the blood left on the corner of the clown's bright red mouth, his gaze involuntarily fell on the bed with the bright red liquid. Then he saw Gower's pale, desperate and mutilated face. Goyle is here, he was killed by the clown. Take what's behind you. Malfoy felt as if his spinal cord had been pierced by cold needles, fear had paralyzed his body, but he turned around without hesitation. Then he saw the mutilated Goyle, and he said with an evil grin in his mouth that was leaking because of the lack of a piece of meat. You can't run away. A cold hand gripped Malfoy's face. Click. Malfoy was awakened by the thunder again, and he opened his eyes blankly and subconsciously looked at the mudblood's bed. The beds were empty and there were no suspicious bulges. Malfoy breathed a sigh of relief, and suddenly his eyes froze and he saw Goyle's bed. The bed looked normal, but Goyle's mutilated face just now lingered in his mind. Can't find Goyle. Malfoy got out of bed and planned to go to his other little brother, Crabbe. Then he saw the tall, suspicious bulge on Crabbe's bunk. Ah! Malfoy jumped out of bed with a piercing scream. However, when he saw the surrounding scene clearly, he screamed and stuck in his throat, and his eyes were a little confused. What did I just see? Malfoy, whose memory had been erased again, scratched his head, his eyes in a trance. He wanted to ask something, but there was only the mudblood sitting around feeding the owl, and he didn't want to get close to the mudblood. As soon as he saw Louis Malfoy, he felt a chill of fear, and seeing Louis sitting there, with no younger brother around, Malfoy was a little panicked, and rushed out of the dormitory without saying a word. Draco? At the door, Goyle and Crabbe walked over, their faces much better, as if they were cured by the food. How do you? Don't come over. Malfoy suddenly yelled, and then he himself froze. What happened? Why are you so afraid of your two little brothers? Draco? Are you okay? Goyle stepped forward to see how Malfoy was doing, but Malfoy, who saw Goyle approaching, seemed to see a smirking Goyle walking towards him with half of his face. Don't come over. Malfoy let out another growl, pushed Goyle and Crabbe away and rushed out, leaving only Goyle and Crabbe with dazed faces. Louis listened to the voice outside the door and looked at the system prompt. You used illusion to confuse an underage wizard. Interrupted, you didn't get any reward. Louis, who had planned to arrange another nightmare reincarnation for Malfoy, suddenly remembered that Malfoy had just escaped the illusion not long ago, and it would be crazy if he reincarnated again. In order to prevent unnecessary trouble, Lewis could only interrupt the illusion of Malfoy, but the effect of intimidation was still there, and it seemed that Malfoy had experienced at least 2 cycles of fear. The door to the dormitory was opened, Goyle and Crabbe walked in, and then they saw Lewis, staggering. They looked at Lewis, who was looking as usual, remembering Malfoy's performance just now, and swallowed their spit nervously. "Oh, I'm not full yet, Crabbe, I'm going to go to the kitchen and find something to eat." Goyle laughed, turned around and left. "Wait. Wait for me too." Crabbe smiled at Lewis worse than crying and chased Goyle away. Lewis smiled slightly, very satisfied with the understanding of these two. "Don't eat it, look at your fat." Lewis patted Fafnir on the head and put away the mouse in his hand. Fafnir screamed disapprovingly, jumped on top of Lewis and continued to beg for food. "Don't make trouble, show you something good." Lewis pushed away Fafnir's face, pulled a silk scarf from his sleeve and waved it in front of it. Episode 53, Fafnir's gaze was naturally drawn to the scarf, and his neck turned as the scarf fluttered. Suddenly the scarves turned into 2, and before Fafnir could react to which one to see, one of the scarves suddenly turned into a syringe gun with a pale green solution. The pointed needle flashed through the air, and Fafnir seemed to realize something and let out a short, rapid cry. "There are people who want to harm you. Obedient, don't move, it doesn't hurt." Lewis seemed to be a strange maze who tricked a child into giving injections, and he started quickly and accurately, and stabbed into Fafnir's subwing veins with a brush. The pale green gene enhancement potion poured into Fafnir's body, and the effect was so remarkable, and Fafnir gasped over. "You fooled your own owl, fantastic beasts, you get 80 fraud points. Current points, 14,520 points. Cumulative fooling fantastic beasts, part 2 of 3. Looking at the smoked Fafnir, Lewis touched its heartbeat, made sure that it fainted and not really sent away, so he cleaned up the feathers that Fafnir struggled down and threw them aside, sat on the sofa next to him and took out a delicate heather pipe. "I don't know if it will work with this to find a way to open the next level of the lottery." Lewis muttered to himself, without much hesitation, snapped his fingers and the flame of a dragon charm emerged from his finger and lit the tobacco in the pipe. Then the tobacco went out. Lewis, who had never smoked a cigarette or a pipe, was numb. "How did you order this thing?" Lewis scratched his head, remembering the actions in the past to watch TV series and movies, put his mouth to the mouth of the pipe and sucked hard while igniting the fire. A thick smoke suddenly poured into his lungs, choking Lewis to cough so hard that he almost didn't cough out his lungs. At the same time, Lewis felt that his brain was clear, in sharp contrast to the burning lungs, and countless ideas burst out in the brain, quickly combining to form one key clue after another. "It works." Lewis put his pipe away first, coughing and converging his thoughts about Hogwarts, trying to find a way to open the next level of the draw. The Harry Potter series of movie books that he had seen in the past flipped through Lewis's mind, and one key character after another appeared in his mind. The clues are like lines that connect key points and eventually form the final answer in Lewis's mind. Time passed minute by minute, and soon 5 minutes were up, and Lewis sat on the couch and breathed a long sigh of relief. Sherlock Holmes' pipe is really useful, although the lack of clues directly allows Lewis to sort out the final answer, but it also gives Lewis several maximum possibilities. The first is the most likely and the hardest. Complete a fraud that has some impact on one of them under the double gaze of Dumbledore and the Phoenix. Dumbledore is a legendary wizard who has lived for nearly 2 centuries, with a wealth of experience, even if he is old and dizzy, he has the help of the Phoenix to make up for this defect. And the Phoenix itself has a good intelligence plus observation and dynamic vision beyond a certain boundary, and it is not simple to hide from these two at the same time. However, it is not completely without a chance. After all, there is still a Voldemort in the school, and if he wants to use the Dark Lord's early detonation to stage a big change for Dumbledore and his Phoenix. But the early detonation must have Lewis's initiative, and if he does not appear himself, he must also let Dio Brando appear, which means that Lewis's performance in front of Voldemort will leave loopholes and be detrimental to the subsequent plan to squeeze Voldemort to earn fraud points. The second guess rested on Voldemort. The point is not Voldemort's Buddha, but his Horcruxes. Voldemort's Horcrux is arguably the most critical prop in the entire Harry Potter story, the source of Voldemort's immortality. If you can collect Voldemort's Horcruxes, there will likely be some changes to the system. The third guess somewhat overlaps with the second, which is to explore Hogwarts. Hogwarts is a mysterious school of magic, a mysterious castle, and even used as a war bunker during the persecution of wizards, and its interior hides many unknown secrets, such as the Slytherin Chamber of Secrets and the Magical Room of Requirement. These two places even Dumbledore, as the headmaster, did not know their existence and specifics. Dumbledore had strayed into the Room of Demand, but he did not know the place. Exploring these two places has the potential to cause a certain reaction from Lewis's system, and there is one of Voldemort's Horcruxes in the house, so you can try it together. There is a fourth, but this method was ignored by Lewis as soon as it appeared. That is to collect the Deathly Hallows. Elder Wand, Resurrection Stone and Invisibility Cloak. These three pieces are both mythical and legendary, as well as magical and powerful props that exist in real life. The Elder Wand has a powerful amplification power that amplifies the wand owner's strength and makes it even stronger, and it is now in Dumbledore's hands. The Resurrection Stone is embedded in one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, which are located in the old mansion of the God family, the same family of Voldemort's bloodline. The Cloak of Invisibility is also in Dumbledore's hands, but he will give or return the cloak to Harry this Christmas. Because that thing itself belongs to the Potter family. These three things are bound to be uneven in the short term, so they are directly ignored by Lewis. Lewis could only think of so much with the help of a pipe for the time being. In addition to the first method for temporary holding, the second and third are worth trying, and the fourth, forcing a shot has a chance, and you can earn a lot of fate points by the way, but that means fishing for everything, and it's hard to earn fraud points later. Lewis simply thought about it and came up with an idea. In any case, you must avoid the situation of making your own move, and even if it is really necessary, let the best do it. Lewis is so careful. In the final analysis, the wizarding world is too small. This group of rare monsters that can provide a large number of fraud points. Once his essence is exposed, it will be difficult for him to squeeze fraud points from the wizarding world. After all, it's hard to trust a powerful and ill-intentioned person, and fraud is about convincing others in the first place. Lewis took out his pipe again, and the embers in the pipe had not yet been extinguished, and Lewis blew into the bowl to rekindle the tobacco. He still had something to think about, and although the process of smoking a pipe was painful, the result was still fragrant. Lewis looked at the pipe fiercely and took another puff. Episode 54. This time, Lewis tried to sort out what he saw as knowledge of alchemy. The pipe is worthy of Lewis's identification of inspiration amplifiers, and in the case of Lewis's clear goal, the brain is dexterous as if it is not his own, and after a while, the messy knowledge seen in the library is sorted out. Taking advantage of the afterglow of this feeling, Lewis picked up the 2 books packed from the library, and just like that, as the brain ran rapidly, the difficult knowledge from the forbidden book area in his mind combined with the basic knowledge of the books in his hand made Lewis' alchemy progress by leaps and bounds. Except for the fact that I haven't had the slightest practical experience until now, it's almost perfect. Phew, perfect. Lewis closed the book and breathed a sigh of relief, his eyes seemed to flash with wisdom. He now has a feeling that he seems ready to make what he wants. Fingers trembling slightly, Lewis had an urge to try. He had a feeling that as long as he did it himself, he would succeed. Strangely, Lewis simply didn't have any props to do. Alchemy is ultimately a wizarding discipline based on magic, and many props are generated by transplanting its effects to physical items with magic as the core. Lewis can't cast magic, and naturally, he can't use alchemy directly. No, I need a foreign helper. Lewis frowned in deep thought. A teacher who doesn't reveal the secret that I'm a Muggle, but still has enough intelligence and experience, preferably with groundbreaking thinking. But where do you find it? Lewis threw the unconscious Fafnir into the half-open cage and lay on the bed, thinking by himself. If he is the founder of alchemy, then he must have a way, right? Lewis thought to himself. He remembered the book he disliked, Hermes and Hermancora's. If Hermes himself had come to teach me. Lewis muttered to himself, his voice gradually muffled, but his eyes brightened. Yes. Why can't I have Hermes teach me personally? Lewis jumped out of bed. I have the power of the rat charm, wouldn't it be nice to just resurrect a statue? After all, Lewis was still not skilled enough in mastering the power of spells, and he actually forgot that he still had an artifact with the effect of rat charms. But the rat charm also needs to have a carrier, and without the statue of Hermes, there is nothing I can do. Lewis thought for a moment. It was not easy to get a statue of Hermes at Hogwarts. Although there are statues of Hermes in many parts of the world, Lewis can't go all the way to steal them, right? Looks like I'm going to make one myself. Lewis touched his chin and thought. This is not too difficult for Lewis, and it is more convenient to do it yourself, and some restrictions on the statue can be realized. It takes a little longer. It takes about 10 days for wood carving, and it takes 3 months for stone carving, or wood carving is more convenient. Start preparing tomorrow. Lewis looked up at the schedule on the table. Tomorrow's classes were charms and flying lessons, both with Gryffindor. If you want to look for wood carving materials tomorrow, maybe you can ask Hagrid, he should have a lot there. Lewis was thinking about tomorrow's schedule. As for the search for Horcruxes and the Room of Demand, Lewis is not in a hurry, he still has a long time to come to Japan. In the bathroom, Lewis, who had damp hair, took a basin of water and put it in front of him, and took out a concentrated mental mutagen liquid from the space. He just tried to use the dragon's blood shower gel. It felt very good, the skin and muscles were moisturized, crispy and numb, as if a slight electric shock, making people feel extra comfortable. As for its strengthening effect, Lewis did not feel it for the time being, and it is estimated that it will take years to have an effect. Now it's time to try the effects of psychogenic mutagens. Lewis opened the tube and poured the dark blue liquid into the basin. Suddenly, the whole basin of clear water was dyed dark blue, and there was no appearance of being diluted. Concentrated mental mutagenesis liquid. It is said that minors need to be used under the supervision of the explosives disposal team, which is a very dangerous but also particularly effective mental power enhancement item. Lewis looked at a whole basin of fluorescent liquid, hesitated, and plunged his head directly into it. The dark blue liquid overflowed the mouth, nose, and eyes, until the neck, and the entire skull was soaked in this basin of liquid. At the moment when his head plunged in, Lewis suddenly felt as if countless insects were rushing to drill down his pores, eyes, nose, and mouth into his head, and then open the skin and drill all the way to the brain from every place he could drill into. This feeling is easy to say, but the actual effect is painful and crazy. Those little worms were like particles that would explode, reaching Lewis's brain after peeling the skin and cramping pain, and Lewis's mental power was rapidly strengthened with this burst of explosions like chicken blood, and the powerful force hit his brain case uncontrollably. Lewis's face buried in the basin was twisting, and wisps of black impurities like scrap of waste overflowed from his mouth and nose, and there was a trace of blood mixed in the impurities. In Lewis's closed eyes, the shadows of the dog charm and the horse charm appeared in turn. As the strengthening process progresses, Lewis's head becomes a spirit bomb that will explode at any time, but he will always be pulled back to the critical point by the power of the double charm at the critical moment of the imminent explosion, and then want to explode and give first aid. The feeling lasted 10 minutes, and those 10 minutes were like a year for Lewis. Finally, Lewis's consciousness came to his senses, and the raging explosion of spiritual power blew up the dark and turbid water into the sky. Lewis stood up straight and opened his eyes. A pair of deep eyes seemed to have a substantial spiritual power surging, and the horse charm and the dog charm each occupied a pupil. The murky water falling from the sky was held up by an invisible force, then converged into a rotating ball of water, and then launched out to hit the masonry on the bathroom wall. Only to hear a loud noise, uniform traces of pressure appeared on the hard masonry surface, as if washed by a high-pressure water gun. This is pure spiritual power without any power mixed in. Under the action of concentrated spiritual mutagen, Lewis not only reaches the limit of influencing material by relying on spiritual power alone, but also has a power that cannot be ignored. Now, I don't have to worry about the Muggle expulsion curse. Feeling this mental power that can leave the body at any time and spread for hundreds of meters for as long as there will be no sense of exhaustion, Lewis smiled with satisfaction. Episode 55. When I went to bed at night, the other roommates returned to the dormitory reluctantly. This may be the first time this dormitory has arrived, but everyone's faces are not very good. Draco Malfoy, in particular, was scared half to death in the afternoon and forced to return here in the evening, a feeling that was a double rejection from physical to psychological. In the long run, I am afraid that I will suffer from some mental illness. Lewis lay in bed and closed his eyes, not paying attention to his roommate's mental health problems. The effect of concentrating the psychic inducer was strong, but it also made Lewis feel very tired, and this state continued until the next morning. Lewis woke up late, which was almost impossible for him with a strict biological clock. And Fafnir, probably because the modification of the gene-enhanced potion is not over yet, is still lying on his back in the cage and sleeping, looking like a burp. Lewis didn't bother with it, washed up in a tired spirit, and went to the auditorium to eat. The exhaustion of mental strengthening is not something that can be overcome by will, but Lewis will not be late for this, and he still calmly steps into the classroom of the Charms class. The professor of the Charms class is Philippus Flitwick, the head of Ravenclaw House, a powerful wizard with this goblin bloodline, once won the title of Duel Champion, and has his own unique insights in spell-casting techniques and research. It didn't work for Lewis though, and the class was boring for him, because all he had to do was memorize every movement of Professor Flitwick as he demonstrated casting, and then make the feathers float with the chicken charm. In fact, he didn't even need the power of the chicken charm, and his near-substantial spiritual power alone allowed him to hold up feathers out of thin air. Or the invisible hand of a mage. In short, Lewis has many ways to fool everyone's eyes. Look at that, Mr. Wilson did it, and the posture is standard, and the feathers are floating very smoothly, Slytherin +10. Professor Flitwick is glad that a genius of spells has appeared in his class. You use powers other than magic to fool others into thinking you're using magic. You fooled 19 underage wizards and a goblin wizard who is proficient in spells and fighting. Inconsequential fooling. You earn 2,400 fraud points. Current points, 16,920 points. Lewis accepted Professor Flitwick's praise, but unfortunately he did not have the right not to write homework. However, most Hogwarts classes are one class a week, and checking homework will only happen in class next week, and students have a week to complete their homework, which is plenty of time. But only if you don't have the habit of putting off homework until the last day, otherwise it's a nightmare. After class, Lewis passed by the big clock on the school's clock tower to look at the time, thought about it and walked towards the outside of the castle. He was going to go to Hagrid and ask him to find some wood and tools for carving. Although he and Hagrid don't know each other very well, Hagrid himself is a warm-hearted and good person, and because of his physique, he is often suspected, and a little kindness can be rewarded unusually. Overall a friend worth making deeply. Hagrid lived on the outskirts of the Forbidden Forest, northeast of the castle, where there was a rugged hut where Hagrid and his hounds were located. There is a stone staircase path behind the castle that leads there. When Lewis got closer, he saw Hagrid tending to the pumpkin field outside the hut, which were large and looked very good. Houndtooth was the first to sense the stranger approaching and barked in Lewis's direction, but huddled behind Hagrid and did not dare to rush up. When Hagrid saw the strange appearance of his teeth, he straightened up and saw Lewis on the path. "Good noon, Lewis." Hagrid waved hello and saw Lewis a little happy. "How did it feel at Hogwarts?" "Not bad, the classmates are very obedient, and the professors are very friendly." Lewis replied with a smile. Hagrid didn't quite understand what an obedient classmate meant, but he didn't care, and took off the apron that looked like a sail from his body. "Come in and have some tea." Hagrid beckoned. "This is the first time I've had a student here." Lewis nodded and followed Hagrid to his cabin. The hound seemed to understand that Lewis was not an enemy, and came to his side and sniffed. Lewis patted its head friendlily, and the achievement of the Fantastic Beasts trainer was remarkable, which immediately made the timid Tooth like Lewis and play happily with him. It's really rare, and Tooth rarely gets close to strangers. Hagrid opened the door and looked surprised at the teeth attached to Lewis. "I'm naturally attracted to animals," Lewis said. "Is it? It's a good talent, and in third year you can try to choose Professor Sylvanus Kettleborn's Fantastic Beasts Protection course, who is a very knowledgeable professor." Hagrid took out a large cup, put coarse tea in it, poured hot water, and happily suggested as Lewis suggested. "Well, if there's a chance," Lewis said casually. To be honest, Lewis didn't really want to take this class, because the professor in it would become Hagrid in his third year. Hagrid is fine to be a friend, but he's a little unreliable, especially when it comes to the gap between people. Haig's class had to endure Hagrid's dangerous courses that were based on his own physical fitness, and although Lewis didn't care about the dangers, he hated the kind of accidents he couldn't master. And Hagrid's classes are generally full of surprises. "Hagrid, I see pumpkin fields outside, are those for Halloween?" Lewis chose to divert from the subject. "Yes, they're not big enough, and by Halloween harvest they'll be much bigger, definitely enough for schools." Hagrid sat on the couch. "By the way, I still don't know which house you entered in, Hufflepuff or Gryffindor? Or Ravenclaw? Why not guess the Slytherins?" Lewis held up the teacup with his head, thinking that Hagrid had probably not considered what such a large cup would mean to an 11-year-old. "How is it possible? Slytherins don't like Muggle wizards." Hagrid laughed. Episode 56. Hagrid looked at Lewis with an expression that didn't look like he was laughing, and said in surprise, "You really went to Slytherin?" "Of course. But they..." "That's right, they still call me a mudblood." "Mudblood? How dare they?" "This is too much," Hagrid said angrily. "You should tell the professor and let the professor punish them." "It's not necessary, it's too troublesome for professors, they will soon be taught a lesson." Lewis finally didn't make up his mind to drink the cup of tea and put it back, probably condemned by conscience, so they had a collective nightmare. Nightmare? Collectively? Hagrid was stunned for a long time, not understanding what this collective nightmare was. "By the way, Hagrid," Lewis stopped talking, calculating the time to go to lunch, "can you help me get the tools for carving?" "Tools for carving? What do you want that for?" Hagrid asked casually. "That kind of thing needs to be bought at Hogsmeade or even Diagon Alley. I'll bring you one if you want. Just make something small." Lewis took a few galleons from his pocket and handed them to Hagrid. "Thank you." "You're welcome." Hagrid picked up a galleon. "That kind of thing is not expensive, a few six will do." Seiko is a silver coin, a type of wizard currency, and there is also a copper nat. 1 galleon equals 17 Western is equal to 493 nats, which is quite British. "Then please," Lewis said and chatted with Hagrid for a while before leaving. With the tools to make a Hermes to teach him, it's quite exciting to imagine. Back at the castle, Lewis saw 2 familiar figures cleaning the corridor, and Filch was holding his cat and standing to the side staring at them contentedly. "Aren't these Weasley's twins? I haven't seen why I pulled so much for a long time, not only to clean but also not to use magic." "Oh, remember, it was the punishment for running into the corridor on the 4th floor before, that's fine." Lewis passed by and glanced at the twins, whose styles were not quite the same as usual. Well, smoky haircuts, and half-burned eyebrows. Lewis decided not to see it and walked straight past him. Unfortunately, the twins' punishment had just ended, and George and Fred, who were tired and sore backs, had just straightened up, saw Lewis passing by, and immediately dropped their rag brooms and pounced. Wilson, don't run. George took the lead and grabbed Lewis's robe. Lewis looked back at the gray-haired and dirt-faced George, the corners of his mouth twitched, and he couldn't help but smile. Is there something? He asked. Is there any powder that can be burned by yourself? Fred also caught up and asked. Yes, there is. Lewis looked at the two and raised his eyebrows. What are you doing so quickly? The bag I gave you can be used for at least 10 times to perform magic. You can't take it and eat it, right? We were going to look into it and see if we could put it in our new product, and it blew up. George grimaced and said, Fred's eyebrows are burned. Your hair is half scorched. Not to be outdone, Fred tugged at half of George's hair. Lewis watched speechlessly as the twins turned on each other and stopped them. It's okay to give it to you, but what we said before is an exchange. I can't provide you with this kind of props unconditionally. You must provide me with your experience in making props. Lewis took out a small bag of powder and handed it to the twins. Without saying a word, the Weasley twins let go of each other and took the bag from Lewis. Looking at the two who immediately got back together, Lewis snapped his fingers and reminded the twins to look at him. Don't forget our agreement, you will teach me the experience of making props. Lewis said. Don't worry. We do what we say. Fred and George each said a word, and then Fred took a note out of his arms. It's a case of failure in making something and the reason we found out ourselves. Fred said. With this you should be able to take a little less detour. George continued. On weekends, we'll find a place to work on new products together, and when the time comes, we'll call you along. Goodbye then. The twins handed their things to Lewis and left. When the time comes, you will teach us magic. Lewis didn't really care about the twins' last words. Magic was of little use to wizards, and at most it could only give the twins a little idea of joke props. And magic is not something that can be learned if you want to learn. When the time comes, just get some classic little magic tricks to teach them. Lewis briefly flipped through the notes Fred had given him, made sure it wasn't written indiscriminately, and put it away. Eating, and taking flying lessons in the afternoon, it was a manual work, and Lewis had to use the chicken charm to support himself with a broom the whole time. Lunch with Hermione, sharing the content of the two's lesson, and exchanging a few words with Padma, who came over. After the lunch break, Lewis received a broom and followed the professor's steps to the courtyard of the castle. In the process, Lewis noticed someone pointing at him and whispering. Although they think they are hiding around the corner and hidden outside Lewis's field of vision, Lewis's mental power is not vegetarian, and the spiritual power released daily makes those people see it clearly. Then Lewis noticed the figures of several senior Slytherin boys. Isn't the class time good? The class is here to ponder the crooked way? What a lack of education. Lewis took an old broom and scrutinized what they were saying with mental power. Ready? Don't worry, there is no problem. Make sure to let him fly to a high place and fall. That's good, let him dare to attack us, at least let him embarrass. The senior boys of Slytherin left quickly, and they had to rush to class. Lewis's mental power chased after the students until they reached the defense against the dark arts classroom opposite the castle, the corners of his mouth slightly raised. I thought those guys in Slytherin could be honest after a nightmare, and I didn't think anyone would dare to do bad. Lewis remembered the locations of the bad Slytherins, intending to return with an accident in return for their zealous move. Episode 57, Flying Lessons are still Slytherins and Gryffindors together. Harry and Ron excitedly hugged their brooms and walked in front of the line, saying that no one could refuse the temptation to fly, even if it was just sitting on a broom and letting the broom fly. Okay guys, now stand in 2 rows and put your brooms on the side of your body. Rolanda Hooch, who teaches flying lessons, is radiant, like a keen owl, directing the students. Flying lessons are one of the most special courses at Hogwarts, which are generally only set for 1 semester, and the exams are very easy, basically giving points. Lewis, like the other students, threw his broom on the ground and waited for the teacher's orders. Now, put your hands above the broom and shout up. Professor Hooch said. Up. Up. The students gave orders to the broom one after another, but only a few students woke the broom at once. One was Harry, who made the broom obedient by talent alone. The other is Draco Malfoy. Although he has been intimidated, as the richest family in the wizarding world, he has played with all kinds of brooms since he was a child, and has long been proficient in the various operations of brooms. Waking up brooms is not a problem. Do not think that brooms are cheap. A seemingly ordinary broom is actually a very high-tech alchemical product. In some ways, a good flying broom is even more expensive than the Weasleys' flying car, and the average wizarding family will at most buy a toy broom with little operability for their child instead of a real flying broom. Just like the average Muggle family would buy toy cars for their children, but if you want to buy a real sports car for fun, it must be the kind of family that is rich and rich. Malfoy is such a family, and in contrast, the Weasleys are the kind that even toy cars have to pass down from generation to generation. Ron, who did not have much experience in operating brooms, had a problem when summoning the broom, because the mood was too hot, causing the broom to smash into Ron's face like a stuffy stick, and the sound made Professor Hooch can't help but frown. As for Lewis, he was a Muggle, and Muggles had the ability to summon a broom with a hammer, and the chicken charm walked straight up, causing the broom to float into his hand. Others had a little difficulty, and the broom heard the instructions, but they all circled under the hands of the students, rather than obediently burrowing into their hands. Good. Professor Hooch looked approvingly at the 3 students who had awakened the broom at once. Slytherin plus 10 points, Gryffindor plus 5 points. Summoning a broom is not very difficult, and it can be quickly picked up with a little trying. Within minutes, all the students had managed to grasp their brooms. Very well, then everyone now ride on a broomstick, tentatively hover off the ground, remember not to fly too high. Professor Hooch instructed. The students obediently rode up, and just as everyone was carefully controlling the broom to float low, one of them exclaimed and flew towards the sky unsteadily. It was Neville Longbottom, the round-faced boy with a toad. Lewis floated lightly in the air with a broom, and saw Neville's familiar face with a familiar panicked expression being carried by the broom towards the air. This plot is a bit familiar. Lewis looked up and thought about it, and came to his senses. This seems to be the reason Harry Potter joined the Quidditch team in his first year, where he showed off his Quidditch talent to snatch memory balls from Draco Malfoy, and later received a Light Wheel 2000 broom from Professor McGonagall, a Quidditch fanatic. But with Lewis there, that wouldn't have happened. Lewis glanced at the panicked Neville to get to know him. There's no need to make him suffer, isn't it? Mr. Longbottom? Control your broom down. Professor Hooch shouted sternly, I order you to come down. At this time, the professor actually said such a thing. If he could come down, would he scream like killing a pig? Lewis was a little suspicious of this Professor Hooch's ingredients. Wouldn't this one be a Muggle too? Otherwise, why not just use magic? I saw Neville's broom rushing out like gunpowder, drawing an irregular arc in the sky. Neville sat on the broom and held the broom tightly, and closed his eyes, and shouted that he didn't dare to relax in the slightest. The broom took Neville from ultra-low altitude flight to rocket straight-up attitude, and then turned in a circle to pass over everyone's heads, and that posture was like a broom consciously taking the initiative to show it to others. But soon it couldn't show off, only to see that a high pull of it changed from a vertical rush to a wall to a parallel dive. As a result, it overestimated its power or underestimated Neville's weight. The broom tail grazed on the wall, and the broom tail that controlled flight and balance was immediately destroyed. The broom, which was already drawing dragons, was even more freewheeling, taking Neville on a rampage in the air, and eventually disintegrating in the air. In the students and professors, left the tormented Neville behind an exclamation. It's now. Silently adjusting the angle, Lewis, who was standing in a straight line with the defense against the dark arts classroom, rushed out with a broom, and rushed towards the direction where Neville fell like an off-string arrow. In the eyes of others, Lewis at this moment is handsome, but it is particularly awkward in Lewis's own senses. Others are riding war horses to save people, saving him specially, and carrying war horses to save people. Lewis's eyes were fixed on Neville in midair, but one hand rested on the grip of the broom, feeling a crack that almost penetrated the broom. This was cracked during the takeoff of Lewis with a broomstick, and someone moved his hands and feet on it, and with a little more movement it would crack and collapse. Eat your own bitter fruit, cub. A cold light flashed in Lewis's eyes, and his gaze fell, focusing on a few Slytherins sitting at the window looking at the 100 years. It is said that the criminal will return to the scene after the murder. It seems that the wizard is not exempt from vulgarity, and also wants to see his masterpiece, and specially sits in the window position. Who dies if you don't die? Let your masterpiece take you to the school hospital. Under Lewis's deliberate destruction, the broom suddenly cracked, and Lewis, who was riding on the surface of the broom, suddenly looked panicked, grabbed the broken grip of the broom with one hand, and grabbed Neville, who was falling down, with the other hand, and crashed into it in the frightened eyes of the Slytherin seniors. Aided by Lewis's movement adjustments and chicken charms, broken brooms and window debris stuck to the Slytherin students like GPS navigation. And Lewis, with Neville's light tumbling and chicken charm power cushioning, stood up under the shocked eyes of Professor Quirrell and the group of 5th graders. Episode 58. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry to frighten everyone. Lewis looked apologetic. I'm very sorry, my broom suddenly shattered for some reason, I just rushed in, he said as he ignored the Slytherin students lying on the ground wailing and glanced at Quirrell on the podium. At this time, Quirrell was holding a large lizard in a panic, hiding behind the podium. Quillina's Quirrell. Lewis looked at Quirrell's pale face and moved slightly. The knowledge of chi magic in his mind and the chi magic seeds in his body reacted, and he seemed to see the dead chi permeating Quirrell's face. The defense against the dark arts professor looked dead, and he just didn't know how long he could last. He didn't have much time to observe Quirrell, for Professor McGonagall, who had hurried over, and Madame Pomfrey from the infirmary, had hurried over. As a vice headmaster, Minerva McGonagall always needs to be busy, unlike Dumbledore, who spends all day fishing. What's going on here? Professor McGonagall shouted in surprise, and Lewis felt like her hair was about to push the wizard's hat up. Sorry, Professor McGonagall, my broom suddenly cracked for some reason. I was too fast to save Neville. I'm sorry for rushing into the classroom and hurting several innocent students. Lewis took the blame on himself with a look of self-blame. You? Professor McGonagall had a visibly ghostly expression. She looked at Lewis, then at the Slytherin students lying on the ground who were being treated urgently by Madame Pomfrey, and wanted to ask how it was Slytherin again, but she still didn't say anything. At this time, Professor Huichi, the professor of the flying class, arrived late, and as soon as he entered the door, he saw a mess. Oh my god, how are those students? Professor Hooch blamed himself. I'm sorry Minerva, it's all my fault. This should be an accident, Rolanda. Professor McGonagall said, Mr. Wilson, can you show me the wreckage of your broom? No problem, Professor. Lewis handed Professor McGonagall the handle of the broom that had been intended to be randomly inserted into one of the lucky ones. Professor McGonagall examined the distinctive broom handle and found clues at the crack. This made her face even more gloomy. Very well, Mr. Wilson, I saw your heroic rescue in the office. Your performance is not considered, but you are very brave. I will give Slytherin 10 points. Professor McGonagall said in a deep voice, but your broom is very strange. I will investigate. If I find out who did it, I will. How about deducting 100 points? 100 points per person. Lewis suggested. Professor McGonagall choked and looked at Lewis with a meaningful look in her eyes. Okay, just deduct 100 points, 100 per person. After Professor McGonagall finished speaking, she used the transfiguration charm to conjure up several stretchers to help Madame Pomfrey transport the injured students out of the Defense Against the Dark Arts classroom, and Lewis saluted everyone and left with Neville. If Lewis knew magic, he would try to clean and fix the place with, refreshed, but he wouldn't, and this kind of family magic existence could not disguise this effect with his own ability. So leave the mess here. Back in the courtyard, Lewis received a warm welcome from the Gryffindor students, and the sight of him flying out on a broom was amazing. As for the Slytherin side, you can't expect any good face from the little snakes who have been taught they don't want face. In short, the first flying lesson was over, and Professor Hooch should leave the class early in order to take care of the frightened Neville and the frightened Lewis, who was also logically injured, so that they could take a break. After class, the students returned their brooms in an orderly manner and left separately, while Lewis saw a prompt on the way to the library. Fate disturbance detected, established fate changes, perturbation intensity, weak, requires some twists and turns and some trivial coincidences to correct. You get reward, destiny points 5 points. Current destiny points, 10 points. Because of Lewis's joint operation, the savior Harry lost the opportunity to show his talent, which had a great impact on Harry, who was not very ostentatious. He was selected for the Gryffindor Quidditch team because Professor McGonagall discovered it when he was showing his great talent. Without the next chance of coincidence and unfolding, Harry would not discover his interest and talent in Quidditch until at least after his first Quidditch match. So these 5 points of fate points, Lewis does not take in vain. That's enough for a lottery. How can you be willing if you don't try it? Lewis thought as he wrote his homework on the charms class. Fate lottery, this special lottery is really exciting. Lewis finished his homework in 3 or 2 clicks, and when he saw Hermione enter the library, he walked over and said hello. Hermione, I have something to do today, so I won't accompany you. Lewis said. It's okay, by the way, there is another class in the evening that you don't forget. Hermione said. One more lesson? Lewis was stunned, recalled the class schedule and patted his head. Oh, you mean astronomy class, Wednesday today? That's right, there will be a herbology class tomorrow, and there will be another one the day after tomorrow. Hermione said, there are 3 herbal classes a week, and this week is a bit chaotic because of the start of school. Okay, I remembered. Lewis nodded. By the way, astronomy classes are taken by all the houses together? It seems so. Hermione held the book and said, see you that night. See you in the evening. Hogwarts has a very scientific subject in addition to some magical subjects, that is, astronomy classes, which open every Wednesday at midnight. There is no way to study this kind of inhumane learning time. After all, the wizard's way of observing the starry sky can only be through the naked eye with the telescope, and there is no convenient method like Muggle. Back in the dormitory, no one else knew where to run, but Fafnir woke up and was closing his eyes in the cage. As if sensing that Lewis was back, Fafnir opened his eyes, jumped out of the cage, and spread his wings to show himself. Fafnir has changed a lot. First of all, its wingspan has grown by 3 centimeters, its height has also changed similarly, its body is more shapely, and its feathers are more lush. In a word, Fafnir has become more handsome. Episode 59. However, the effect of the genetic potion is fierce, that is, after using it on Fafnir, its IQ becomes higher, and it stinks at the same time. Despite Fafner's protests, Lewis threw Fafner, who was showing off his muscles, back into the cage to find a cloth to cover it, and then sat on the sofa to prepare for the lottery. The fate lottery sounds full, and what you can get must be a good thing, right? It's impossible to pop up something more troublesome than the T-virus stock solution, right? Lewis rubbed his hands, calmed his breath, and then began the draw. Destiny draw opens. Fate points consumed, 10 points. Start draw. Suddenly, a large area of crystal-clear silk threads appeared in front of Lewis's eyes, which were entangled and arranged to form a beautiful splendid embroidery. There seems to be the sound of an illusory flywheel turning in my ears, and endless threads of silk pouring out from unknown places into the splendid embroidery. Suddenly, the scene in front of him darkened, and a brilliant point of light fell in front of Lewis, which was a pair of eyes full of stars, as if stuffed into a cosmic galaxy. You got the Eye of Fate observation, pair. Eye of Fate observation observes the direction of fate and enables the holder to obtain the highest talent of all prophecy classes, with ability inheritance, which can retain the ability of both eyes and increase to the limit level of this ability when absorbed. Lewis looked at the pair of crystal-like eyeballs that fell on his hand, shocked by its effect, and gasped. Not to mention the direction of observing the fate of the destiny, the talent of prophecy can be ignored for the time being, so the effect of enhancing the ability of the eye to the limit of ability is too powerful, right? That is to say, after I absorb this pair of eyes, my Sharingan illusion and reproduction effect can be upgraded to the level of the reincarnation eye? Lewis almost couldn't hold back and put the pair of eyes on directly. No, it's too wasteful to use it so directly. At the last minute, Lewis stopped the thought. The effect of the Eye of Fate observation is to improve the ability of a pair of eyes to the limit, but Lewis's right eye has no ability, and if you use it directly, it is equivalent to losing the strengthening of one eye. It's best to draw a pair of other eyes, and then absorb them to maximize the benefits. Thinking of this, Lewis didn't care about the deposit points and other higher-level lotteries. He looked at his remaining points and began to draw 10 consecutive draws. This boutique lottery has been drawn 10 times, 5,000 points are consumed, and 11,920 points remaining. You got a plasma grenade *3. You got a Gauss rifle *1. You got a mass-produced mechanical exoskeleton *1. You get, with the system's prompt, a bunch of technological items were thrown into the storage space by Lewis. 10 consecutive draws again. A total of 10 lucky draws, 5,000 points consumed, points remaining, 6,920 points. You have obtained a holy relic *5. You get the Twisted Magic Eye, System Sends Mercy 2-in-1 edition. You got the magic costume, Moon Spirit Essence. You get a gem full of magic *3. Lewis was lucky, and he obtained the eye props he wanted for the second time in 10 companies. Twisted Magic Eye is a superpower from the Moon Universe Empty Realm, which can distort everything you see. The normal situation is to turn left with the left eye and right eye to the right, and at the same time activate the effect of twisting the target. The system produces to classify them in one eye and directly achieve the effect of twisting the target at will. The effect of this thing is particularly perverted, and Lewis did not expect that he could actually get it in the boutique lottery. Compared to the Twisted Magic Eye, the Magic Gift Moon Spirit Essence is also a good prop. The Moon Spirit Essence is from the Fate series and the Monarch Armero 2 event book, which is also a type Moon universe. Its appearance is a large cloud of flowing mercury, which can transform the 3 forms of attacking the enemy, defense, attack, according to the owner's order, and is a prop with a wide applicability. And the remaining 2 are a bit indiscriminate, the same from the world of the same universe. The gems full of magic need the corresponding gem magic to use, and the holy relics need a complete set of Valhalla to play a role, is a more precious garbage. But it's good to be able to draw what you want. In fact, Lewis is ready to return to the Eye of Fate to delay the absorption of the Eye of Fate in vain. Then, first absorb the Twisted Demon Eye, and then use the Eye of Fate observation. Lewis held the dazzling and iridescent eyeball close to his right eye, and with a sharp pain, the Twisted Demon Eye devoured Lewis's right eye like a living thing, quickly replacing the position of his original right eye. The pain came and went quickly. Lewis's face turned white for a moment. The vision of his right eye was pitch black, and slowly, with the connection between the distorted demon eye and the brain, he completely restored his vision. And the moment he regained his sight, Lewis looked at the door of the dormitory, and the next moment, with the flying and loud noise of wood chips, the door frame was twisted, the wooden door shattered, and the door of the dormitory was instantly destroyed by the power of the Twisted Demon Eye. Behind the door, Draco Malfoy, who was about to push them open, was dumbfounded, his raised hand trembling slightly. Lewis hurriedly closed his right eye. He had not fully adapted to the power of the demon eye, and had just failed to converge the effect of the demon eye's distortion. Fortunately, it didn't hurt anyone, but it looked like Malfoy had experienced another shock. Sorry, just experimented with another magic that didn't hurt you, right? Lewis was kind enough not to speak ill of Malfoy because he had offended him. After all, he is not too vindictive and revenge on the spot, and everyone is still a good classmate after the end of revenge. But apparently Malfoy didn't think so, his lips trembling, his raised hand motionless as if frozen. I'm fine, he said tremblingly, moving back to his bed step by step. As for the forcibly twisted door, it was lying innocently on the ground. By the way, Malfoy, what about the seniors who were admitted to the hospital before? Lewis closed his right eye and smiled and asked, are they badly injured? Malfoy shook his head stiffly, they weren't seriously injured, just skin injuries, which have now been healed and taken away by Professor McGonagall in confinement, is it? It's a bit of a pity, Lewis said, then remember meeting them and talking to them to help us fix the door of the dormitory, or I will retaliate. I haven't forgotten how they almost killed me on my broom. Episode 60, Don't Face. The corners of Malfoy's mouth twitched and scolded angrily. Those people must have been deliberate in the hospital, and you even wanted to threaten them after you had retaliated against them. Although he thought so, Malfoy dared not to agree, so he could only nod his head stoically. I'll tell you. You wait for me to tell Dad about this place and let him fire you. Malfoy whispered in his heart. Malfoy learned, knowing that if he threatened the other party, he would immediately be retaliated against, and those two nightmares were related to this mudblood. He had to wait until the dust settled, and the mudblood was cleaned up and had to get out of here before he came forward to taunt him. It has to be said that there is pressure to improve, and isn't it also an improvement that Malfoy has changed from a Slytherin who is more reckless than Gryffindor to what he is now? After absorbing the twisted demon eye, Lewis adjusted a little bit, during which he secretly opened his eyes, causing one of his boxes to be twisted, and the clothes he had inside to be scrapped, and a bag of rats in Fafnir was twisted. Fafnir complained about this for a long time, but it stopped when Lewis cleaned up the rat and stuffed it in its mouth. It eventually took Lewis half an hour to fully adapt to the power of the twisted demon eye and release it freely, but the damage caused by this process caused Lewis a lot of damage. And, scaring Draco Malfoy so much that he thought Lewis was going to finish him off. Fortunately, there were no casualties and no animal casualties. The twisted demon eye is a direct distortion of the target, without judgment and no confrontation, as if directly ordering them to move at both ends of the target. In theory, as long as it is in the field of vision, no matter how big or small the material, it cannot escape the fate of distortion. If you look at a person, then 80% of this person will be squeezed out of all the blood in his body by Lewis's magic eye like a towel, turning into a twisted human dry. Cruel and powerful, this Dark Lord simply gave him the right place, and Voldemort was weak. After digesting the magic eye, Lewis opened his eyes and looked at Malfoy. Don't you have anything to do? Lewis asked politely. You. What are you doing? Malfoy hugged his pillow and looked at Lewis in horror. Whether it was the twisted door frame and door panels, or the twisted objects scattered around Lewis, they all told of Lewis's brutality, which made Malfoy regret why he had to come back so early. He should have waited for Crabbe and Goyle to come back with him. I mean, if you're busy, you can get out of here first, understand? Lewis said with a smile as he looked at Malfoy. Malfoy was stunned for a moment, and the little head melon spun rapidly under the pressure. Understood. Malfoy nodded desperately and ran out of the bedroom with a puff of smoke. Satisfied with Malfoy's path, Lewis got up and placed a confusing illusion in the doorway, making sure that no one would break in before he began to absorb the Eye of Fate observation. The two crystal clear eyes that seemed to have a sea of stars under the eyes turn into two streams of light and blend into Lewis's eyes. Compared with the grumpy magic eyes, these two eyeballs are much more peaceful, moisturizing Lewis's eyes like a hot spring, without the slightest discomfort, making people can't help but want to sleep. Just when Lewis was about to fall asleep, his eyes were closed, and the dark Lewis in front of him suddenly felt that he saw the stars in the sky. Countless brilliant threads stretch out among the stars, like ropes carrying puppets into the world. Lewis suddenly opened his eyes, his left eye highlighted 3 Go Jade. As the starlight surged, the Go Jade melted, turning into a star ring composed of starlight hidden in the pupils, the right eye rainbow light shining, contaminated by the starlight into a galaxy. But none of that mattered. When Lewis opened his eyes, he found that his vision had changed, and above his head was a sea of stars, and he saw translucent silk threads, which connected Lewis himself at one end, and spread out into the starry sky at the other end and did not know where they were connected. Lewis stretched out his hand and tried to touch the silk threads, and suddenly he felt a pain in his eyes, and his vision changed back to its original state. He was still sitting on the bed in the dormitory, with no threads on his body and no starry sky above his head, as if everything just now was an illusion. But there's nothing wrong with that realism and the burning of your eyes. That's what is called destiny? Lewis said to himself. Is the starry sky overhead the entity of destiny? Is the thread on one's own body the embodiment of fate manipulating people? Lewis didn't know the answer, but he thought it was worth looking into. Putting aside his brief strange vision for a moment, Lewis began to study the changes in his ability to see both eyes. The first is the Sharingan. Through the strengthening of the Eye of Fate observation, concentric circles similar to the reincarnation eye are formed inside the pupil, but there is no change in the ability of this eye. It is said that it is strengthened to the limit, and there is no bonus ability. Now Lewis's illusion ability has reached the point where he can dominate a person's life and death, and he can also manipulate the passage of time in illusion, allowing a person to survive in illusion for decades, but a few seconds outside pass. As for the ability to copy, it's better than nothing, that is, to make Lewis's memory stronger, but this thing usually can't see how strong it is. It can't be said that the time to remember a picture has evolved from 0.01 seconds to 0.001 seconds, right? That doesn't make sense. What's even more powerful is the distorted demon eye. The original power of the twisted demon eye made Lewis feel that this thing should not appear in the boutique level rewards, but it appeared, and Lewis was pure and rudimentary. The original ability of the distorted demon eye is to distort all substances within the field of vision, which is almost impossible to enter, and it is basically said that it has reached its peak. But under the enhancement of the Eye of Fate observation, its effect has been outrageously enhanced. First, perspective and microscopic. The previous one is easy to understand, that is, the material that originally needed direct observation to be distorted can also be distorted through a wall, epic strengthening. And the second one is off the big score. It allows Lewis to see something smaller. How small? Can make Lewis see atoms and electrons. Understood, this is a hand rub of a nuclear bomb. Well, just kidding, Lewis is not so crazy to rub a nuclear bomb by hand, and twisting the number of electrons of an atom alone can't make a nuclear bomb, that is to reach a critical mass. And compared to the second ability of the twisted demon eye, the so-called nuclear bomb is just sprinkling water.